On Sunday, Jose Antonio Cast won Chile's presidential election by a healthy 16-point margin. Cast is pretty right-wing. He's an open admirer of Chilean dictator Augusto Pinochet and is often described by the international press as ultra-conservative, or far-right. But Cast is far from the only conservative politician to succeed in Latin America recently. Right-wingers have also prevailed in Argentina, Bolivia, and El Salvador, and look likely to succeed in Honduras, Colombia, and Peru. This has all led to some suggestion in the regional press that the so-called pink tide that apparently swept the region in the late 2010s and early 2020s, when left-wing candidates swept to power in Argentina, Bolivia, Peru, Honduras, Chile, Colombia, and Brazil, has receded or even reversed. So in this video, we thought we'd take a look at the right's resurgence in Latin America and try our best to figure out what might be driving it. We like to be accountable, so every year we release a video responding to your biggest criticism. This year's just came out, and we tackled everything from accusations of bias, claims that our adverts are getting longer, and why Jack looks like this guy.
Oh no! Oh my goodness. I don't think I've ever agreed with anything more in my entire life. Can you make sure you show that photo on the screen? It's uncanny.
Take a watch by clicking the link in the description. So let's start by taking a look at all of the countries in Latin America where right-wingers have won in recent years, going backwards from the most recent election. That obviously means starting with the Chilean election, which happened on Sunday, where Cast won 58% of the vote against Janet Jara, a member of Chile's Communist Party and former Labour minister under the current left-wing president Gabriel Boric. Cast was a member of Chile's mainstream conservative bloc, the Independent Democratic Union, until 2016, when he split from the party because it wasn't right-wing enough for him. He then ran for president as an independent candidate in 2017, but won just 8% of the vote in the first round. He then tried again in 2021, when he got through to the second round runoff, when he lost to the left-wing candidate Gabriel Boric. But he then ran again this year, where he finally triumphed. The next election on our list is the Honduran presidential election, which was held on November 30th. While counting is ongoing amid allegations of electoral fraud, the presumptive winner is Nastria Sfura of the National Party, another conservative right-winger who's been endorsed by US President Donald Trump and Argentinian President Javier Milei. Sfura succeeds Xiomara Castro, who ended 12 years of conservative National Party rule when she won the last presidential election in 2021, but has since struggled to tamp down corruption and inflation. Next, we've got the Argentinian midterm elections, which were held on October 26th to elect roughly half of the seats in the Chamber of Deputies and a third of the seats in the Senate. As you might already know, these were a triumph for Argentina's right-wing president Javier Milei, who won a 41% plurality of the vote, 7 points more than the left-wing Peronist bloc, and enough to guarantee his La Libertad Avanza a so-called blocking minority in Congress. In more good news for Milei, in the month and a half between the elections and the new deputies actually taking their seats, a number of deputies from other right-wing parties have defected to La Libertad Avanza, while a number of left-wing deputies have split off from the main Peronist bloc, meaning that Milei's party is the largest single force in the chamber. Finally, we've got the Bolivian general election, which was held on August 17th. Here, the incumbent MAS party, a left-wing party that's been in power for roughly 2 decades, suffered a near-total wipeout, retaining just 2 seats in the Chamber of Deputies and losing all seats in the Senate. The presidential election was also won by Rodrigo Paz, who was probably more centrist than the other candidate in the runoff, Jorge Quiroga, but nonetheless far more right-wing than his predecessor, MAS member Luis Arce. So you get the idea. At a number of recent elections in Latin America, right-wingers have triumphed. Now, of course, this hasn't happened everywhere. Mexico and Brazil, for instance, are currently led by 2 staunch left-wingers in Claudia Sheinbaum and Lula, who have both recently won national elections and enjoy pretty solid approval ratings. However, other left-wing incumbents in Latin America seem to be struggling. In Peru, for instance, left-wing President Pedro Castillo was removed in late 2022, barely a year after winning election, only to be succeeded by his vice president Dina Boluarte. Boluarte quickly became quite literally the most unpopular leader in the world, before finally being removed early this year, and a right-wing candidate will almost definitely win the next elections in April. Similarly, Colombia's incumbent president, Gustavo Petro, who became Colombia's first left-wing leader in its modern history when he won in 2022, lost control of the Senate in April 2024, and has seen his net approval rating fall to about -20. So, What's going on here? Why is Latin America apparently shifting right? Well, while there are obviously country-specific reasons in each case, we see at least 3 regional trends here. First, an anti-incumbent effect. Left-wingers did well in the last election cycle, hence the talk of a pink tide a few years ago. But because being an incumbent in Latin America is pretty tough, right-wingers are now doing well in the current election cycle. New governments rarely make it to a second term, and until Morena's victory in Mexico last year, Latin America had witnessed 20 successive national elections since 2019, where the incumbent failed to get re-elected. This is presumably in part because many Latin American countries suffer from persistent inflation, and as the last couple of years have demonstrated, inflation is electorally toxic for incumbents. The second regional trend is crime. Many electorally successful right-wing candidates in the region have campaigned on law and order platforms, apparently inspired by the success of El Salvador's president Nayib Bukele, who's been rewarded for his unprecedented crackdown on the country's gangs with sky-high approval ratings, and won last year's election by a landslide. Costa Rica's president Rodrigo Chavez, for instance, has explicitly said that he wants to copy Bukele's policies, while in Chile, Kast spent much of his campaign promising to crack down on crime, repeatedly linking rising immigration and crime rates. And in Colombia, Gustavo Petro's electoral woes are in part a consequence of the fact that voters don't think that he's got enough of a handle on the country's crime problem. Third and finally, Latin American right-wingers have successfully weaponized certain cultural issues against their left-wing opponents. Politicians like Argentina's Javier Milei spend a surprising amount of time on talking points that might seem familiar to voters in Europe and the US, attacking things like globalism, gender ideology, and cultural Marxism. This sort of language has more traction than you might expect with Latin American electorates, both because these electorates are generally pretty conservative on social issues, and because lots of young voters in Latin America are very online, that means they're more familiar with these sorts of cultural debates that have been raging on Twitter, X, and other platforms for years now. To reiterate, this isn't intended as a complete explanation, and there are obviously lots of country-specific factors at play too. Nonetheless, it does feel like, save for Mexico and Brazil, Latin America is shifting right, which bodes well for Trump's strategic ambitions in the Western Hemisphere. Now, as a viewer of TLDR, we know that you're a details person, so you probably check at least half a dozen reviews before forming an opinion or making a big-ticket purchase. You read the nutritional information on cereal boxes. You even read the terms and conditions for some app you almost downloaded. So when you're giving to charity, why should these things be any different? Well, today's sponsor, GiveWell, provides you with those details as an independent resource for rigorous, transparent research about great giving opportunities. For example, their recent analysis of the effects of cash transfers in poorer regions of Africa contains over 300 footnotes, which might satisfy even the most meticulous readers. That's because GiveWell have spent 18 years researching global health and poverty alleviation, and only directs funding to the highest impact opportunities that they found. These are things like preventative medication for malaria. It costs about $7 to provide a child with malaria treatment through the high malaria season. And these treatments can reduce the number of malaria infections, and with enough treatment, can save a life in expectation. Over 150,000 donors have already trusted GiveWell to direct more than $2.5 billion. And rigorous evidence suggests that these donations will save over 300,000 lives, and improve the lives of millions more. You can find all of their research and recommendations on their site for free, and thanks to the donors who chose to sponsor their research, GiveWell doesn't take a cut from your tax-deductible donation to their recommended funds. And if this is your first gift through GiveWell, you can even have your donation matched up to $100 before the end of the year, or as long as matching funds last. To do so, go to givewell.org and pick YouTube, and enter TLDR News at checkout so they know you heard about GiveWell from us. Again, that's givewell.org to donate and find out more.